Hey everyone. Hey everyone, it's me, Simon Wesley again. Wait, are we on? Please tell me that I'm not going to be having any more tech issues tonight because I've already had to deal with too much crap. Yeah, it should be on me. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. If you couldn't tell, I've been having a lot of tech issues, and I think at this point I actually have successfully found out what the main problem was. Um, so I was preparing to. I had everything set up like about 40 minutes ago, about 35, 40 minutes ago, ready to just fully ready to start streaming. Then my computer shuts off again. So, yeah, I was talking to my older brother because he knows more about electronics than I do, and and we both came to the conclusion that the problem is more likely than not that the power supply unit to this computer is a bit too old to really handle anything anymore. Like, like the problem isn't that it can't handle the amount of power. Like it should be more than enough for what I've got in it, but it's basically old. I've had this PSU since I bought this PC about 5 years ago. Apparently now is when the things start to go bad. So yeah, that's just something I gotta deal with, but let's put my complaining to the side for now. Sorry for yapping about that. But yeah, I'm just happy that I can actually get back to streaming. So let's pick up from where we last left off with Witch on the Holy Night. Which, yeah, we just finished we just got past the we just got past the part with Flat Snark and Aoko obliterating the moon. Which that's just pretty funny. Uh, anyway, yeah. So hopefully we won't have any issues. Yeah, hopefully we won't have any issues. But let's get to this next chapter. Might be a little shorter. Hopefully it's a little shorter than the previous chapter that took me 3 hours to go through. I know it sounds like I'm complaining about that, but I really did enjoy that chapter. It just went on for way longer than I expected it to have gone. But yeah, next episode, let's see what Aoko does with the Sochiro in a bottle. It was only chapter. He was still in a deep sleep. It all seemed to blaze in a mad, fiery red. Unbearable idle thoughts, incessant obstinacy. Melancholy sights and gloomy, bittersweet talk. Fickle, wickle, fickle wickedness born of human interaction. Namely, the voice of a forsaken coexistence. This, however, was the scenery of a world far removed from that. If there were those praying this was paradise, then there were likely also those lamenting it as the underworld. In a decade, or perhaps longer, this would all change. But for now, the autumn leaves remained yet untrampled by human souls. It was scenery he knew well. Life in the mountains was humble and modest. There were no conspicuous buildings among the wilderness he called home. They gathered and stockpiled only what they needed to survive without pillaging the land. Serpentine trails could be seen woven through the fields, and the stone steps leading to the summit were obscured by the forest, only visible once upon them. The mountain inhabitants probably intended it that way. There was no sign of mankind's exploitation among the mountain landscape. He suddenly remembered that this was the season he liked the most. Or rather, it suited him the most. There was much to be done to prepare for winter, but whenever he had a free moment, he would make his way toward the mountain top, gazing idly at the setting sun while breathing deep the crisp autumn air. Gazing idly at the setting sun while breathing deep in the crisp autumn air was probably the second favorite of his daily joys. It relaxed him, the cold but comforting wind at dusk, and the way the sunset dyed the peaks of vibrant crimson. Not 2 months had passed since coming down from the mountains, and already it pained him that the memories had begun to fade. Someone once told him that memories fade every day. So the best one can do is make as many new ones as possible. Recollections grew hazy. A new place to live meant the beginning of a new life. He wasn't sure if he was reluctant to let go of the scenery he'd cherished for so long, or if he'd merely been spoiled by it. Despite his new home in a city surrounded by tall buildings, he felt guilty for wanting those memories alone to remain clear in his head. Either way, he had to make the best of a fresh start. What kind of man thinks more about where he came from than where he's going? He contemplated. He tried to stop himself from indulging in uncharacteristic sentimentality. It wouldn't be a dream if it was easy to understand. The moment he realized he was dreaming, angular shadows began to rise from the autumn colors. They were concrete buildings, previously unknown, and yet familiar to him at the same time. This was how his current life was washing away his memories. Struggle as he might, there was no stopping the degradation of human memory or impressions. It was merely a fact of life. By nature, humans lived in the present over the past. Eventually, even his most cherished memories would be swallowed up by the buildings. It was neither cruel nor heartless. If they were sure to disappear, then for now he would content himself with dreaming about the memories he could clearly recall. Whether in the mountains or the city, the days flew by. Yesterday's scenery was not the same as today's. Hey, Aoko! And such, she'd given him no time to grieve. Distant nostalgia was beautiful, but that made it fleeting. A faint dizziness made him close his eyes. Without sight, the mountainous landscape vanished, but in its place a familiar voice could be heard. It was a booming voice that seemed to shake not only the mountainside he stood upon, but the entire mountain as well. And of course, Aoko Alzaki reappeared, towering in the distance. He must have been tired, he thought, diagnosing himself while trying to make out what she was saying. Fearing the vertigo would return if he reopened his eyes, he decided to keep them closed. It sounded like she was arguing with someone, though the tone was all he could make out. It wasn't violent, but certainly aggressive. Maybe she was picking a fight with another mountain across the way. He wouldn't put it past her. Well, she is certainly a contentious person. After all, she was a troublemaker who blew up the moon. He couldn't quite grasp the conversation, though somehow, vaguely, he had the sense that his human rights were being largely ignored. It was deeply unsettling, even for a dream. After several minutes, It seemed that the high-impact argument ended in Aoko's victory. Then suddenly, the boisterous voice faded. Praying everything would be back to normal, he opened his eyes. He took a deep, slow breath. The scenery was a far cry from the nostalgic dreamscape he had just left, albeit not unpleasant either. Without a doubt, it was the amusement park. To him, this was his freshest memory. He recalled the house of mirrors that Aoko Ozaki destroyed. This park was a flawless replica of reality, but he was the only one there. Without having to worry about anyone chasing him, he sat down in the wreckage of Kitsy's rides and looked up at the moon that should have been shot down. The winter moon shone white like a jewel. It was layered over the figure of the girl who tried to kill him. If a mage was a witch, then she definitely fit the bill. I don't mind being killed. Such an absurd thing to say, but it spilled out of him so naturally. That had nothing to do with witches or magecraft. There was an echo in the gaps of his heart. If she had not spoken those words, then he would not have responded as he did. In that moment, what had Aoko Ozaki said to him? As he tried to remember, his deep slumber drew to an end. And with it, his chance to find the answers he so wished he could find. Then, Sojiro woke up in an unfamiliar room, gasping. Not because the plush mattress he was on was softer than his apartment's cheap futon, or because everything from the carpet to the wallpaper looked expensive. Hey, Alice. Bewildered, he tried to catch his breath. She was the cause of his surprise. The moment Sojiro's eyes snapped open, there she was. The girl dressed in black, sitting at his... There she was, There she was, the girl dressed in black, sitting at his bedside. The silence was deafening. Still supine on the bed, Sojiro gazed at her. His impulse was to sit up, but he refrained, thinking it might be rude to be staring at the person sitting next to him. She was just sitting there, menacingly. She was just sitting there, on a chair, dressed in black, modest clothes. Still, she projected an air that was anything but plain. Her monochrome outfit evoked indescribable elegance, like a costume handmade just for her from the finest fabrics. It was enough to inspire poetic sentiments even in Sojiro. The girl continued to sit, completely motionless. Without realizing it, Sojiro had stopped breathing. Genuine astonishment had him captivated. Such beauty. It was the first time he'd ever thought to use such a simple, plain expression to describe another human being. She was the daffodil in perfect bloom, with the ideal female form seen only in dreams. This quality was something to be cherished and admired in her. It was different from Aoko Ozaki's blindingly radiant vitality. After all, the flame that burns twice as bright burns half as long. And there was no way this girl would be allowed such a happy ending. Her life was a solitary fable of someone who left the world in exactly the same way they entered it. With her humanity stolen at birth, hers was an existence not of this world. The more beautiful something was, the more tragic its fate. Growing up in the mountains, this was not something Sojiro was taught, but something he learned from experience. Sojiro turned his head, as though he was being lured in. He knew it was rude to stare, but he couldn't fight his instincts. Then... This time, his heart actually skipped a beat. She was not asleep at all. Expressionless, she was merely watching over him while he recovered. Sojiro froze, unable to turn his head away or think of something clever to say. It was like staring into her eyes turned into stone. Gorgon. Perhaps because of her delicate features, she looked somewhat younger than him. On the other hand, her tranquil expression made him feel like she was older. Jet black hair just to her shoulders. Large eyes were set like onyx stones matching her hair. Devoid of emotion, her gaze stayed fixed on Sojiro. Even after their eyes met, she did not turn away. He wanted to speak, but could not find the words. It was not unlike a frog being stared down by a snake. Nevertheless, he just could not bring himself to say something. Additionally, no matter how carefree Sojiro might have been, he was painfully aware that this girl was as powerful as Aoko. Less talkative, to be sure, but still powerful. Objectively, the scene was not unlike that of someone nursing a bedridden stranger. He had no idea what she may have been thinking about, but it seemed to him this harsh silence might last forever. All he could say for sure was that the quiet did not appear to bother her in the slightest. It was like some bizarre form of punishment. He thought, keeping his eyes on the girl. He felt like the moment he turned his head or blinked, she might stab him in the chest with a hidden blade. And not because his imagination was running away with him. In the stifling silence, it was only natural that Sojiro would think back on what had happened in the amusement park, and it made him uneasy. But stronger than any anxiety was his fascination with the girl. Her slender frame and milky white skin, the chill of her guarded stare, the warmth of her linger. It was the mixture of those two latter qualities that was almost magical. He stared at her for so long he began to get the feeling that they had met somewhere before. Sometime before the conflict at Kitsyland. He could not quite put his finger on it, but he was sure he had seen her previously. His voice shattered the frozen silence of the room. He almost felt sorry for making noise as he spoke out to her. But they could not very well just sit there and stare at each other forever. Though he might have been the only one thinking they were staring. And perhaps she thought they were glaring at each other. She narrowed her eyes slightly, though apparently not out of offense. There was no response. Just as he was thinking it would have been better to keep quiet, she quietly raised her hand. Her voice was cold but melodic. A white piece of cloth was wrapped in her fingers. There was no need to tell him what it was. He was conscious enough to recognize his own possessions. Sojiro sat speechless as she tossed it to him. Picking it up, he wrapped it around his neck. Oh wait, it was the bandages. Wait. Actually, yeah, that's... What is under the bandages? He looked away in response to her blunt question, distracted by something unrelated. She called Aoko Elzaki by her given name, which led him to believe that the mountain Aoko had argued with in his dream was actually the girl beside him. As sincerely as he could, he answered without presumption. There are things that should be known and things that need not be. There are also things that should be told and other things that must not be. Sojiro was not exactly sure what that she was referring to. However, he smiled slightly at her question. Perhaps impressed by his response, the overwhelming pressure in the room dissipated noticeably. Or maybe she had been more nervous than he was the entire time, projecting the image that his room was her domain a tad too strongly. The tension faded. Sojiro tried to sit up and prop his arms beneath him. Now that they were talking, it seemed awkward to stay lying down. However, his body felt strange as he tried to move, and it surprised him how difficult it was to sit up. It took everything he had just to raise his upper body to a sitting position. I mean, given how much he ran in the previous, or the night early, or given how much he ran in the previous chapter, I wouldn't be surprised if he's completely drained of energy. As he threw the covers back, he tilted his head quizzically. She stared at him, not expecting him to complain about not wearing pajamas while sleeping. Somehow it appeared that he had done something to surprise her. I mean, she's probably surprised that you thought she's probably surprised that he thought that she or Aoko were going to change him into pajamas while he was asleep. Pounding a bit at the unwarranted curiosity, he turned to face her. Although he was still mostly lying down, it was at least a more dignified position. Indeed. You need to find out where he was and who she was before anything else. Actually, the more he thought about what happened at the amusement park, the more he got a sinking feeling in his stomach. Perhaps finally getting through to her, she calmly moved her arm from behind her back. When... Hey, Aoko. Once again, they silently locked eyes. Thump, thump, thump. There was a startling sound of rapidly approaching footsteps. They both had a pretty good idea of who it was. Just as expected, Aoko Ozaki burst through the door with a thunderous roar. She entered wearing her school uniform, her long hair flowing behind her. Her breathing was heavy, and her forehead was wrinkled by a scowl, granting her a demonic appearance. Alice! This girl named Alice scowled slightly in response. She may have even let a sigh of disappointment slip out. Yeah, because I don't think she could trust you not to murder him in his sleep. Her calm voice was the polar opposite of Aoko's. Needless to say, her voice dripped with a brazen coldness. Effortlessly, she brushed aside Aoko's jab. In doing so, Sotro had the distinct impression that she no longer even realized he was in the room. Alice frowned slightly and fell silent. Her housemate seemed to have struck a nerve that Alice herself did not know was there. Aoko grumbled more to herself than anyone else in the room. Then she locked eyes with Alice. Or more accurately, they cleared daggers at each other. The room had become tense once again. It felt like a fight could break out at any moment. With no way to escape, Sotaro had no choice but to sit and watch. But then, the electric silence that seemed like it would last forever suddenly broke out about a minute later. Apparently, this sort of clash was an everyday occurrence. Alice stood up from the chair and made for the door. Watching her go, Sotaro cocked his head. In her hand was what could only be described as... Yep, she was gonna stab it. Yep, she was gonna stab him if Aoko didn't rush into the room. He had no other words to describe the tool she was clutching. Aoko asked Alice as she walked past. Alice answered expressionlessly before briskly walking out of the room. Sotaro thought it best to not think too deeply about the scene he had just witnessed. Honestly, probably the... I don't know. I don't blame him. At this point, he's already been through enough crazy stuff in the past 24 hours, so probably best to just not think about it at the moment. And just focus on the issue at hand. At any rate, the girl in black had withdrawn, and along with her the feeling of tension, leaving a bedridden Sotaro alone with an Aoko still dressed for school. From Sotaro's perspective, this was a perfect chance to get answers to his ever-growing list of questions. She nodded, satisfied as she took a seat. He answered meekly, dropping his shoulders. He opened and closed his left hand a few times, but moving his fingers felt slow and awkward. It was clear he was still in bad shape. Meanwhile, Aoko was blinking her eyes in wonder. Or was it admiration? Between Alice and Aoko, Sotaro did not know which of the girls was the harder to read. Wait, he was out cold for 2 days straight? Actually, you know what? I shouldn't be all that surprised. Given that, well, A, he was already overworking himself and was probably short on sleep. Secondly, the events at the amusement park would have pretty much drained most people of any sort of energy whatsoever. Oh, and yeah, both of those two would probably do him even worse. Sotaro nodded at the word curse as if recalling it suddenly. It was all coming back to him now. Sorry, just had a couple chips. didn't want I didn't want to subject anyone to hearing me chew tortilla chips. Man, those things are pretty addicting, though.
経緯はどうあれ、後でアリスにお礼を言っときなさい。私じゃ解除できなかったんだから。
ひどい花もあったもんだ。あ、けどアリスっていうのはさっきの子か？遊園地で俺たちを殺そうとした？
Aoko replied that it was.
彼女ずっとそこに座ってたけど。
Sojiro scanned the room again. He was not accustomed to sleeping on anything other than a futon, and the room looked especially foreign to him.
ここはただの客室。長いこと使ってなかったから埃だらけでしょ。それよりアリスと何か話したの？い
や、あれを会話というのは。
He brought his hand to his mouth and recalled the few words they exchanged. As Sojiro said, calling it a conversation would be a gross overstatement. And yet, thinking back on it, it seemed like they had talked for hours, which brought an uncomfortable smile to his face.
とはいえ、緊張は解けたと思うよ。青崎がやってくるのがもう少し遅かったらよかったのに。
Aoko narrowed her eyes at his innocent slip of the tongue. She knew Sojiro did not mean to treat her like a nuisance, but nevertheless she found it hard to take the full brunt of the words said to her face. Even worse, she sensed she was getting used to his manner of speaking.
でも、だからなのかもね。相変わらず首の皮一枚の人生を送ってるわ、あなたって。
He tilted his head, clearly confused.
だから、あんたはよっぽどアリス好みの対応をしたのよ。 まだ生きてるってそういうこと。
No matter how hard he tried, he could not grasp what she was getting at. He decided to change the subject to something else.
ところで、ここはどこなんだ？あの子に聞いても教えてくれなかったけど、青崎なら教えてくれるだろう。
ここは三崎町の幽霊屋敷よ。正確にはクオンジ邸と言えばいいかしらね。さっきの子。 クオンジアリスの持ち家で私が住んでるところでもある。あの後あなたをここまで持ってきたんだけど覚えてないでしょ？
Something about the way she said that made him feel uncomfortable.
クオンジっていう名前は聞き覚えがあるような。そうだ、よく商店街でおじさんたちが話してた。なんでも偉いお金持ちだと。それ、アリスの前ではご法度よ。 穏便にここで暮らしたいならね。
Confused yet again, Sojiro tilted his head for what seemed like the 100th time that day. And once again, he had heard something to make him feel uneasy.
青崎。
しずきくん、私ね、あからさまな嘘を言う人と同じことを何度も言わせる人と、そのあたり覚えておいてね。ここで平穏に暮らしたいなら。
With her best smile, Aoko made her threatening proclamation. Needless to say, it caught Sojiro completely off guard.
気のせいならいいんだけど、君の言葉には俺がここに住むような響きが感じられる。
He shot her an honest stare of disapproval. It was the best resistance he could muster, but it was not in the slightest effective against Aoko's overpowering, ruthless glare.
あなた、自分の立場を分かってる？
He considered her words carefully. He wanted to openly express his feelings on the matter, but instead he swallowed his words and shook his head. Despite his typical inability to read people's emotions, he at least seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. It appeared that he finally realized that it was his carefree mood that typically got on Aoko's nerves.
ああ、そうだった。あんたに回りくどいいわ。考える時間ぐらいあげたかったけど、時間もないし、はっきりと言ってあげる。 いい？しずきくん。この度、あなたは私たちの監視下に置かれることになりました。もちろん、生殺与奪の権利はこちらにあるという条件で。
The blatant tyranny in her voice caused him to sputter. He wished that she would stop smiling in an attempt to make it seem any less outrageous. It was not the faint expectation of living under the same roof with Aoko that had him flustered. Rather, he was genuinely concerned about his own safety. And yeah, no, I don't blame him in the slightest. I don't blame him in the slightest for being concerned. Like, he's in the same house as two people that had previously tried to kill him. Even if he likes Aoko, regardless of how he might feel about Aoko, there's no denying the fact that she did try to kill him. And that Alice also tried to murder him. Regardless of how good-natured he was, it seemed he finally had come to grips with the fact that he just escaped death. Aoko agreed, as blunt a comparison as it was.
たまには的確な比喩をするじゃない。あなたの言う通り、下手なことをしたり決まりを破ったりしたら。それと、ここに住んでるのは私とアリスの二人だけよ。あの子、私なんかより数倍常識ないから。
Aoko was 100% serious. It was her sincerity that made it all the more believable. Obviously, there was no way the victim, Sojiro, could accept these terms.
俺にはちっとも青崎がわからない。監視するって言うけど、なんでそんな話になってるんだ？考えられる青崎はいろいろ間違ってる。いや、それとも魔術師っていうのはみんな青崎みたいなのか。
Arrogant and selfish were the words that the harmless boy's gaze seemed to imply. Aoko felt a headache coming on. Due to his innate easygoing persona, Sojiro had not thought to question that Aoko being a mage was out of the ordinary.
だからあんたがそういう風に誰はばかることなく私たちのことを言いふらさないかを見張ってんじゃないこの常識なし。
Aoko flew out of her chair. She had been doing her best to keep her cool, but it seemed her well of patience had finally run dry. Witnessing Aoko snap, Sojiro clapped his hands together.
そうか。青崎が俺を殺そうとしたのは魔術師であることを隠さなくちゃいけないからだったっけ。うん、それならわかる。監視するのは青崎の秘密のことで、俺の命云々はおまけみたいなものか。
そりゃ本質的に言えばそうだけど。
Yeah, because it is a little harsh. I mean, I guess she's being more merciful than the average mage by not killing him outright. I appreciate that they're actually I appreciate that he's actually calling her on her crap.
けど、それはあまり意味がないんじゃないか？学校もあるし、バイトだってあるんだ。一日中この家から出ないわけにはいかないんだぞ。
Did she not? In an instant, Sojiro's objectivity had her stumped, leaving her at a loss for words. He honestly had no idea what position he was in. To believe that he had any sort of freedom at this point was shocking, to say the least. Aoko somehow managed to compose herself. As a matter of fact, she never had any intention of imprisoning him. Stripping him of his freedom and incarcerating him would go against their agreement anyway. Besides, if she was going to go that far, it would be easier to just kill him. Aoko, letting him live, meant showing a modicum of respect to Sojiro's way of life. A light bulb went on in his head as he blurted out what he was thinking. It appeared he had finally gotten the grim message. Aoko looked somewhat satisfied at his decision. A gloomy look fell over Sojiro's face as he found his concern growing by the second.
あなたの処遇はこの家に住むことを前提にした監視で、それも解決策が見つかるまでの期間限定。
You could just, I don't know, find a spell that could wipe his memories of the event. Like, he would probably appreciate that more.
何でもいいから目撃者を殺すなんてことより、だいたいこれは私とあなたとの約束なんだから、いちいち文句言わないでよね。ただでさえアリスとの冷戦が続いてて頭痛いんだから。
Yeah, honestly, now that I think about it, Aoko's probably the one that argued hardest for letting him live. No, Aoko probably just made a few concessions so that Alice would agree to not killing him. She sighed as she stared Sojiro down as he lay on the bed.
けど勘違いはしないで。ここじゃあんたの地位は最下層のさらに下。番犬よりさ、これで自分の立場分かった？
As Aoko finished her declaration, Sojiro subtly looked up at the ceiling so she would not notice his reaction. He meant no offense to Aoko, but he had to hide the fact that he fundamentally disagreed with her analogy. In Sojiro's opinion, it was disrespectful to both dogs and humans to call him lower than a dog. A more accurate analogy of their power dynamic would be that of a rabbit and a wild boar. Hence why he chose not to voice his opinion. Unlike his apartment, the ceiling here was decorated with ornate patterns. Putting aside how he would be treated here, in terms of lodging, it was a definite upgrade. Maybe it would not be all that bad. Sojiro nodded slowly as if to persuade himself. As if to gaslight himself into accepting the situation. And...
とりあえず命は助けてあげるから。
That is what she had told him. That is what she had told him not 2 days ago.
自分の立場は分かったよ。うん。確かにそんな約束だった。いろいろと言いたいことはあるけど、それは認めるしかない。だけど、君たちと一緒に住めっていうのは本気なのか？青崎は細かいことは気にしない。
At that point, he zipped his lips. Aoko was smiling again. Run! Aoko's eyes were tinged with bloodlust. Her contrived smile so obviously struck despair into Sojiro's heart. Come to think of it, he vaguely recalled her warning to him to not make her repeat herself. Furthermore, as a practical matter, Sojiro Suzuki's life was now in the hands of Aoko Ozaki. It would be unwise to anger her further. He told himself as if speaking to a third person. None, Aoko said with a firm nod of her head. Sojiro lumped his shoulders in surrender.
青崎の言い分は分かった。ただ、一応聞いておきたいんだけど、俺の人権はどこに行ってしまったんだろう。
バカね。そんな形のないものなんて。
Sojiro reflected upon her answer, now feeling like his question was indeed stupid. You should have already known the answer before he asked.
ああ、だと思った。そんな気はしてたんだ。目が覚める前から。
I think we're only now just starting to get to the halfway point of this game. Like, I asked the person who recommended me the game how many chapters there were, and since we're on 6, I think they said there were like 11 to 13, so still plenty of room for Aoko to get more character development. But honestly, at the very least, the fact that she's at least letting him live is definitely some character development. And also, I do want to make it clear, Aoko is a pretty well-written character so far. And I especially appreciate that they are actually painting her behavior as unreasonable. Worse written things would pass her behavior off as being completely fine, but the game is actually portraying it as, you know, being kind of, for lack of a better term, sociopathic. His muttering provoked a dubious stare from Aoko before she quickly retracted it. If she questioned every little thing he said, they would be there until sundown.
とにかく 納得いったみたいね。じゃあ次、いよいよ本題。今に移動するわよ。一人で立てる？
さっきから手を動かしてたから血は巡ってる。
なら問題ないわね。
With that, she turned her back and walked away from him. He had seen this bold form of hers many times before. Instantly, the memories flashed back to him like lightning.
そうだった。青崎はこういうやつだった。
Without knowing it, he cracked a smile. He was so lost that he did not know his left from his right, but recalling this alone was enough to calm him. The Aoko he knew was different from the one in the House of Mirrors. She was not that brooding girl he saw there. He felt a pang of nostalgia. The Aoko he knew was brisk in movement and faltering in gaze, just like this one. She was the same as when he first met her, moody yet overflowing with confidence, in her element.
ほら、急いだ急いだ。アリスがさっきから今でお待ちかねよ。
She was already outside the door, standing in the chilly corridor. Grunting and groaning, Sojiro eventually got to his feet. His body, heavy and stiff while he was laying down, cried out in pain as he tried to stand and walk. Every step sent shooting pains through his bones. Oh no. I haven't been... Well, actually, when I got my wisdom teeth out, I was technically bedridden for a bit. But no, this is reminding me when, like, your legs fall asleep and you try to get up and nearly collapse. But, yeah. Do some stretches. It'll help loosen you up a little bit. Every step sent shooting pains through his bones. Despite this, he put on a calm face and made his way towards Aoko. Typically, he was quick to not pay any mind to life's little struggles, but these pains, he needed to force himself to consciously ignore them. In other words, he was displaying false bravado, an uncharacteristic reaction for someone who never suppressed their true feelings.
驚いた。あんた本当にタフね。
ありがとう。けど心は弱いんだ。
参考までに心に留めておくわ。できるだけ優しく扱えるようにね。
Naturally, her voice was devoid of any true empathy. She turned away from the once more dejected Sojiro and began walking briskly down the corridor. Just then, she stopped. Feet snapped together as though something had popped into her head. And just as if she was remembering something she'd forgotten in a completely trivial way...
それじゃあ行くわよ。ついてきて、宗十郎。
She gallantly turned back the way she was leading, the words sounding so natural as she spoke them. Aoko did not see the look in Sojiro's eyes as he heard her words. For though she worked in the arcane, the spell Aoko had woven was apparent to everyone but her. After blinking his eyes as if blinded by something, Sojiro casually nodded and followed behind her. The sheer size of the interior was daunting. The 3 floors of this mansion contained more rooms than Sojiro's entire apartment building, except their size was excessive. Here, the mansion's rooms seemed too numerous for so few inhabitants, its lavish, carpeted halls cold and dreary. The guest room that Sojiro had been sleeping in was on the 2nd floor of the east wing. A staircase leading down to the 1st floor was at the end of the corridor, at the center of the mansion. Winter sunlight beamed through the windows, which only made the empty corridor appear even lonelier. The center of the mansion was topped by a vaulted skylight overlooking the first floor. The staircase connecting the first and second floors lined its walls. Another staircase at the other end of the second floor corridor presumably led to an attic or storeroom of some sorts on the third floor. Paying no mind to Sojo's gawking, Aoko ascended the stairs with familiar steps. The foyer was a place of white and wood grain. Its hardwood floors shone brightly under the sunlight coming in from the ceiling, and the tall white walls were spotless and brawny. There was a staircase leading to the second floor, and a long unused fireplace. A neglected telephone sat on a table opposite a solemn grandfather clock. It was more like an old castle than a mansion. Aoko shot Sojo a callous stare, who stood captivated by the otherworldly scenery. She grabbed the knob of the door next to the stairs. There were 4 doors to the foyer, and the easternmost as you entered the house led to the drawing room. The door on the opposite side of the foyer led to the mansion's west wing. To the south was the entrance. On the north side was one more door next to the fireplace. Tucked underneath the stairs, this door connected to a bathroom, unbeknownst to Sojo. Due to the lack of windows, the first floor's corridors were not well lit. If the second floor was a seldom attended infirmary, the foyer a stairwell in some foreign castle, then the first floor corridor was a windowless labyrinth not unlike the corridors of a hotel. Although it had not been long since Sojo came to the city, even he could feel this place was out of the ordinary. Seeing as how he was going to be stuck here for the foreseeable future, he found it hard to get excited about living in a haunted house.
そこが今で奥が厨房ね。簡単な料理ぐらいはできるようになってるから。今の隣にはサンルームがあるんだけど、ここが食卓の代わり。ってそんなの後でいっか。
Oh, for some reason I just remembered something I might start doing streams of. I'm getting, I'm thinking of doing, at least a couple streams for Helldivers 2. Because, that game is fun. Like, it is insane. It is incredibly fun. It is really fun. Like, last night I played with a few friends, and we were fighting the bug. On the second mission, at one point we started fighting the bugs, and we just got absolutely swarmed by those stupid acid spewing bugs. Still killed the Bile Titan though. And I even landed a direct hit with the orbital bombardment. That game's so much fun. I think I'll stream that next week. But off topic. I need to remember that every time I get onto a little tangent about something, it'll probably last for 5 hours or something. Like the time I accidentally got, like the time when, like this one time, when my dad and I were alone the night, like a night or so before we went hunting, and while we were eating dinner, I unfortunately drew him into a 90-minute long tangent about Warhammer 40k lore. When I was staying at my parents' house for Christmas, he explicitly asked my older brother not to speak about duck hunting and asked me not to speak about 40K while we were there. And the thing was, he was really polite about it. He was like super polite about it. Like he didn't tell us to like shut up. He was just like, please just be mindful. Just be mindful about it. And he also promised that he wouldn't get on tangents about tangents about wiring. That's pretty fun. It's pretty funny, in all honesty. And here I am again, getting on another tangent. I'm just gonna drink some water and then get back to the game. Hydrate or dihydrate. Aoko said, reaching for a door along the dim corridor. However, she paused before turning the knob. She flashed Sojiro a meaningful glance, which she quickly withdrew. Then, without further ado, she opened the door. She said to Alice as she entered the drawing room. After hesitating for a moment, Sojiro entered after her. Compared to the corridor, the drawing room was unexpectedly modern. The carpeted floor, leather sofas, and a large 30-inch television was more what Sojiro had come to expect in a normal home. I forgot it. I keep forgetting that a 30-inch TV was massive in the 80s. I actually remember my family having a TV like this. The good old CRT TVs. Perfect for playing stuff like the NES on. Speaking of which, I actually have an old NES. I actually have an old NES, like, stowed away somewhere. At some point, I'm going to get, like, a capture card to hook up to the TV and stream Castlevania, but actually, no, I can only do that after I can figure out, like, this little issue we have with it, where it stopped, to where it stopped. Okay, so there's, like, a few issues with it. We think it's a problem with one of the resistors on the circuit board. Like, you have to jostle the cartridge a little bit, and if you play for too long, the whole thing freezes up or locks up. And it's on the to-do list of things to fix. But the funny thing is, it previously wasn't working at all, and I somehow managed to diagnose that the original issue was that the old cartridge port, like the original like cartridge input, you know, like the thing you stick the cartridge in, like the actual circuit bit was no good, and I just ordered a replacement part and swapped it out. It was actually surprisingly easy. You just need to unscrew the thing, and you just need to open the thing up and pull it off, like a little bit of the circuit board. And since none of it was soldered, it was pretty much just like pulling. It was pretty much almost the same as like pulling a graphics card out, pulling a graphics card out of your motherboard. Very similar to that. In this family-oriented room, a girl far removed from said setting sat quietly on the sofa. Aoko sat on the sofa across from the girl in all black. This gave Sojiro two seating options. Next to Aoko Ozaki, or next to Alice at Kuonji. After about 2 seconds of deliberation, he decided to stand by the wall as neither option appealed. Aoko and Alice were facing each other across the coffee table. The clean, perfectly leveled table somehow added to the austere atmosphere.
当事者も認めたことだし、これで何の問題もないわね、アリス。
Also, a very reasonable decision. Especially for someone who's in complete madness. Alice gave one deep nod in response to her non-question. From his position against the wall, they looked as though they were clearing up some niggling grievance. Sojiro got the feeling that the two did not entirely see eye to eye concerning what to do with them. She cast a sideways look at Sojiro with those darkly shaded eyes of hers. Her voice shared the same cold indifference, making it abundantly clear that she had no intention of accepting him as a housemate. Alice's voice was a mixture of judgment and scrutiny. She was aware that from an outsider's perspective, she and Aoko appeared dangerous. She wanted to know if Sojiro was up to the challenge of living with such people. Above all else, it was the only way they would let him live. Alice responded apathetically with a non-committal murmur. She silently placed a small object on the table with a clink. She pulled her pale fingers away from a small glass bottle. The glass, more pale blue than transparent, was enough to signify its high quality. With a crane-like motion, she removed the stopper. Even though this was the first time he had seen such a thing, something about it made him uneasy. Was it that it made him sad, or... Aoko's standoffish behavior only added to his concern. Alice once again fixed her eyes on Sojiro, who was bracing himself for the worst. The glint in her eyes was bewitching. Without a single emotion apparent on her face, she called his name.
Shizuki-kun?
Just calls him by his given name.
Hoi?
The moment he responded to her whispered call, his surroundings began to transform. The air grew thick, so thick it took on a color and shape. The density and discomfort that coiled around his skin made it seem like the air had become words. Opening his mouth to gasp for air, the words invaded his lungs. Instinctively, he covered his mouth with his right hand and clutched his chest with his left, both hands appearing clear as mud. Even the thickest of mountain fogs never ceased his senses like this. If he had to come up with an analogy, no words could quite describe it, but it was like he was standing in the pages of a newspaper. The first sense to adjust to this new sensation was his hearing. Then his breathing stabilized, yet the feeling of suffocation remained. There was nothing restraining him that he could see, but he felt an intense claustrophobia. Before he'd even felt shock at the sudden change, he reached out in an attempt to find escape, but his outstretched hands found only emptiness. It seemed contradictory that a place with no walls and a wide view could feel so cramped. Spirited away in a dense fog. Oh, hey, Alice. Back in the mountains, such superstitions never seemed real to him. Until now. Alice? Aoko. And then he finally noticed, a surprise to beat all surprises. The drawing room had not changed into another world at all. He knew this for certain because he could still see the room he was just in through the fog. Wait, did she put him in the glass vial? As well as the two girls, Aoko Ozaki and Alice Kuonji, watching him closely. It was simply a problem of perspective. The floor was dark and perfectly flat. Looking up, there the two of them stood. The two girls were like two impossibly gargantuan clouds, coldly looking down at him. Remembering the structure of the room and layout of the furniture, Sojiro's unsurpassed candor finally grasped his predicament. The parade at the amusement park had nothing on this. Somehow, he was inside of the glass bottle that Alice Kuonji produced only moments ago. Marveling at Alice's wickedness, Aoko glanced at the small bottle on the table. Aoko calmly mused. Alice, however, was not looking down at the bottle. Instead, her eyes were locked on Aoko.
少しは魔術ってもんを思い知らせておかないと困る。アリスがやってくれるなら止めはしないし、怒りもしないわ。ま、こっちが予定していたものより何倍もめちゃくちゃだけど。
Aoko did not take her eyes off the bottle as she spoke. Although she did her best to feign indifference towards Alice's magecraft, she could not completely hide her curiosity. The figure inside the bottle, likely having caught on to what was happening, tried various things like flailing its arms and sprinting around. The surface of the bottle was cloudy, so it was hard to make out exactly what was happening inside.
ところで、これって私にくれたやつとは別物みたいだけど。あれより作りは細かいわ。青子にあげたのは使い捨ての、隔離するだけのものよ。へえ。けど、その青子には聞こえないだけよ。
Alice said calmly, finally dropping her gaze to the bottle. Just then, the figure inside stopped moving. It appeared only Alice had a connection to the world inside the bottle. Aoko sighed, losing interest. Ignoring Aoko, Alice opened her mouth as if to speak to someone not altogether here.
どう？これでも一番無難だと思う。
The person she was talking to was none other than the one inside the bottle. She was, of course, referring to Sojiro's earlier comment. It was her way of testing the boy who implied that living in this mansion seemed safe. Okay, even Aoko has to admit that this is pretty extreme. Even Aoko is admitting that doing this is pretty extreme. I mean, she did say that she was probably going to do something to make him understand what it was like being or living with mages, but I mean, she probably would have just honestly, she probably just would have done something very direct to get the point across quickly and not trap him inside of a bottle like this. Then again, considering Aoko invited this... Actually, yeah, you know what? Fair. Her fight to the death, she was in no position to criticize. She would make sure Alice did not let her emotions get the best of her, but for now she was content to observe as a bystander. After a moment, Alice's expression changed. She must have gotten an answer to her question. Without any way to tell what the situation was inside the bottle, Aoko had no idea what that answer was, however. Only that Alice's face was the one she had made when the boy she was talking to said what she wanted to hear. For an instant, she glanced at Aoko, slightly shaking her head as she reached for the small bottle. She said his name with what seemed like a forlorn frown. As she removed the stopper, the air in the room quivered. The boy, who had been casting a shadow on the wall until a moment ago, now leaned against it for support again. Aoko turned around to face Sojiro right behind her, resting her elbow over the back of the sofa.
どう気分は
見ての通り、めちゃくちゃだ。
Sojiro answered with unusual hostility. I mean, even the nicest of people would probably not be super happy about being put in this situation. So, it might be odd to see him hostile, but it's perfectly reasonable reaction. Aoko was reminded of his strange behavior. She was sure that he would be scared or shocked, not
夢で
angry.
似たようなものを見てなかったら、今頃心臓が止まってたところだ。信じられないのは、なんでいちいち実践するかってことだ。魔術は怖いものなんだって言えば済むだろうに。それと、物騒な青崎の声、聞こえてたぞ。
物騒で悪うごけど言葉じゃなくてきちんとどう魔術ってもんを甘く見てたり
As much as he hated to admit it, she was right. Though it was nothing he'd taken magecraft lightly, but merely that he couldn't understand
け
it.
ど、実感云々、これまでの青崎の無茶っぷりと、今のわけのわからなさはとても比べられない。
そりゃそうよ。アリスと比べないでよね。アリスの魔術は私たちの中でもデタラメで、もう言葉にできないぐらい最悪なんだって言った。
失礼だ。人命を脅かすという点なら青子の方がよっぽど。それよりあなた、本当に彼を殺す気はあったの？一体どんな追い詰め方をすれば青崎なら多分安全なんて言葉が返ってくるのかしらね。
そんなのあんたに決まってるでしょ。
Tsundere. What's that spell? Tsundere. Tsundere. Tsundere.
こいつが何て言ったか知らないけど、絶対意味違うから。
He didn't even say anything. He didn't even really say anything to her. At least outside of the bottle.
こいつはね、そもそも何が危ないのかやけどするまで気づかない。っていうか、やけどしても、よし、死ななきゃ安いなんて本気で思っちゃう天然ボケなの。ね、そうでしょ、宗十郎。
He had no idea why she was suddenly shouting, but he nodded anyway just to be safe. The drawing room had become awfully noisy. Alice sat watching the two at a complete loss. I love how even Alice is actually straight up saying that Aoko. But it's funny how even Alice is straight up pointing it out. And so Sojiro accepted to supervise life in the mansion, and that he would be living under the same roof as two professional mages.
Hmm. まあそういうことなら。
Having experienced firsthand how dangerous that life could get, he was finally at peace with the situation. Even if he did not seem to like it, he had thought it through in his own way and come to a clear resolution.
それじゃあ監視するとは言ったけど、どうやって総十郎を監視するのか。
Perhaps he was brought up to listen closely to lectures about new information because Sojiro suddenly looked attentive. Alice, on the other hand, kept her mouth shut in silent defiance.
最初に言っておくと、あんたをここに住まわせる期限は決まってるから。要はその期限まで誰にも私たちのことを喋らず、また勝手に死ななければ晴れて自由の身ってこと。ね、そうよね、アリス。
そうね。私たちを怒らせなければ、そういう可能性もあるわね。
よし、いきなり話が食い違ってる。
Sojiro's head dropped like he knew what was coming.
ちょっと黙ってて、アリス。あとあんたも黙ってろ。
She scowled at the two of them, already at her wits' end.
話を続けるけど、秘密保持のためにあんたを住まわせる場合、二次災害はどうしても避けられない。同じ家にいる以上、余計に秘密を見せることになるからね。
Now that Aoko mentioned it, Sojiro could see her point. With their target of observation under house arrest, the disclosure of more confidential information was inevitable.
ちょっと待ってくれ。堂々巡りじゃないか、それ。
大丈夫、問題ないわ。だって、最後にはここで暮らした記憶ごと、
忘れてもらう？
そう。公園での一件から、丸ごと全部忘れてもらう。ルーンっていう魔術系統があるんだけどね。その中でサクッと記憶を忘れさせるものがあるのよ。
Wait, why didn't you just do that in the first place?
人道的であるのは変わらないけど。
Oh, wait.
命を消す代わりに記憶を消すってことで妥協して。
Oh.
青崎、それは。
悪いけど反論は却で、肝心の忘却のルーンなんだけど、私もアリスも専門外だから、文献を探して習得するのに時間がかかる。
Okay, that makes sense. If they actually have to find. Okay, no, that actually makes sense. I mean, that doesn't really that still doesn't justify them trying to murder the guy. But it at least makes sense why. But it at least explains why they just didn't lead off with that. Apparently, it's considered both inhumane and something neither of them actually had access to.
つまり、それが監視の起源ってわけ。私たちが忘却のルーンを見つけるまで、命を担保に口を閉じていてもらうわ。アリスはそんなややこしいことはせずに、五感全部壊してしまおうなんて言ってるけど。
Okay, you know what? Aoko is actually okay. Aoko is suddenly somehow on the moral, at least somewhat more morally right than Alice. Actually, no, she was already more moral than Alice up to this point. Because at the very least, at the very least, Aoko was going to be quick about it. Meanwhile, at the very least, Aoko's trying to preserve his life and his general way of doing things. Oh my god, that would be. Alice's idea is just insanely inhumane. Literally just removing his ability to feel literally anything. Sojiro only understood about 80% of what Aoko had explained, and the last part about the living statue had gone straight over his head. He had tried his best to visualize what Aoko was going on about, but the only thing he could conjure in his mind was an image of the mascot creature Kitsy.
それは確かに嫌だな。
I think calling him a vegetable would probably be the more appropriate term. Aoko agreed with the bewildered Sojiro, neither one the wiser to the other's misinterpretation.
とにかく 遅くても1ヶ月で忘却のルーンは見つけ出せるだろうし、それまであんたにはここで暮らしてもらうわけだけど、私たちについて無知のまま歩き回られると命の保証はできないのよ。そっちもこっちの事情を知らないのは気持ち悪いだろうし。なんで今から簡潔に現代の魔法使いの何たるかを教えてあげる。
Well, at the very least, Aoko won out here. She's at least going to try to. She's at least actively trying to make sure he's alive and has at least that to make sure he stays alive and has some quality of life. Doesn't really excuse the whole attempted murder thing, but at the very least, she's not a complete psycho or a complete monster, a complete sociopath like Alice.
それで少しは私たちへの勘違いもなくなるだろうし。
Not that she thought this country bumpkin had any idea of old or new anyway. The thought brought a smug grin to her
洋
lips.
館のことは後にして、まずは私たちの立場についてね。あ、でも1から100まで理解する必要はないから。どうせ門外漢なんだし、漢字言ったことだけしっかり噛み締めておきなさい。
Sojiro nodded obediently to Aoko's professional instructions. This was Aoko's way of telling him not to ask questions when he did not understand something, and though Sojiro had taken issue with her statement, he meekly obeyed, knowing better than to object now. Aoko nodded approvingly at his attentiveness and started her lecture. Her long lecture.
まず魔術師、魔法使いの話からね。魔術と魔法の違いは、宗十郎には関わりのない話だからしないけど、それぞれ別種のものだと思ってくれればいいわ。で、魔術師のことだけど、これは絶対条件として隠された同業者に知られるのは仕方ないとしても、あなたみたいに関わりのない人間に知られるのは罪に当たる。ほとんど死罪クラスのね。なぜかっていうと、魔術ってのは隠されていないと力が薄れてしまうものだから。神秘の語源は閉ざすというギリシャ語だけど、魔術は限られた水着でなければ魔術でなくなってしまう。文明にとって未知なるもの、未開なるものは開かれていないからこそ恐怖に値するのと同じね。知られたら迫害されるから隠すじゃないの。未知でなくなった魔術師というより魔術ね。明かされた魔術は力を弱めてしまう。だから隠匿するのよ。何より
魔術の仕組みはよくわからないけど、とにかく自分だけの秘密でないと弱くなるってことか。じゃあ青崎も弱くなってるのか？俺が見ちゃったから。
いいえ、別に。ここからはちょっと込み入った話でね。
Alright, I think I'm following.
弱くなるっていうのはあくまで全体。それも随分と未来の話。個人単位では関係のない話よ。汝、隠匿すべしって不分律は、この大元の仕組みが形骸化して、いつの間にか絶対のルールになっているだけなの。文明社会の法律と一緒よ。犯罪、不道徳を罰するのは、人間的であろうとする意識の高さと、それとは全く別の全体の仕組みを守るための構造的な結論でしょ。犯罪が罰せられるのは野放しにしたらせっかく築いた社会がうまく機能しなくなるから。で、私たちにとって犯罪に当たるのは神秘の一般化、低俗化であって、不道徳とか殺人とかはまあそれぞれの良心次第ってことで、基本的に罪にもならない。そんなろくでもない連中にルールを敷いたのが魔術協会っていう集まり、組合みたいなものよ。魔術を普及の神秘とせよというのは、魔術を魔術として永続させるために敷いたルールに過ぎないわ。けどその原則は絶対でさ、これを破った者は魔術世界にはいられなくなる。いえ、実際問題として生きていくのが困難になる。私たちは私たちの まあ魔術師としての命、そういうのを守るために目撃者であるあんたを消さなくちゃいけなかった。そこ同情とかしなくていいから。私たちの事情、私たちは私たちの判断であんたを殺そうとしたんだから、誰彼のせい恨むならきちんと私を恨んでちょうだい。ま、それはともかく、過去魔術師は職業として成り立ったぐらい社会に認知されていたけど、その魔術自体は墓まで持っていく秘密だった。それがどう歪んだかは知らないけど、現代ではその職業すら秘密にしなくてはならなくなった。そこまでしないと遠い未来、魔術すら消費するだけのものに解体されると教会は恐れたのよ。自然界の仕組みも、かつて天上の領域だった宇宙の運営すら、私たちは人知で解き明かせるほどになった。人の手に余るもの、神秘という未知の領域にとって魔術が最後の砦になると教会の設立者は信じたのかもしれん。それとも魔術なんてもう意味がないって達観したのかもね。そんなわけで魔術師はその正体を隠して各々の秘技を伝えていった。他人に私もアリスもそうやって何代か続いた連中の末なのよ。さっき言った魔術協会っていうのはそんな細々と続いてる連中を束ねる一大組織。魔術師にとって司法の神ってところかしらね。教会もいろんな派閥に分かれるんだけど、大抵の魔術師はロンドンの魔術協会に属している。汝隠匿すべしっていうのも教会の三大原則の一つよ。魔術師が一般人に秘密を漏らすと教会から罰が下される仕組みになっている。ま、そんな罰なんかなくても自分と血族が伝えた魔術の。
And that was the end of the first part of the lecture. Aoko paused for a moment. Sojo was doing his best to process the information.
次行くけどいい？
いいけど、その前に確認したい。魔術師が正体を隠すのは自分のためじゃなく魔術のためだったけど、最近では自分の正体を隠すことの方が重要になっている。そしてその決まりを破ると教会というところからお咎めが来る。つまり青崎たちもその教会。
いいえ、私たちはフリーよ。単純に教会は最大勢力ってだけ。連中は頼まれもしないのに魔術世界全体の秩序を守ってるの。
So wait, even if they're not a part of the Mage Association themselves, they'll still get punished by the association if they didn't do something about Zojuro. Huh.
だから私たちが何であれ彼らとの関わりがないにしても、魔術師としての決まりを破ったら罰しに来るわ。
わかった。
よしよし、そうやって自分に必要な部分だけ手に入れなさい。じゃ、次は魔術について。と言っても私自身ごめん、こっちの話だから忘れて。さっきも言ったけど、現代において魔術は無意味なものになりつつある。ライターのない大昔なら火を起こせればそれは魔術として成り立つわ。けど今は。
Zojuro nodded with a glum look on his face. He had been made painfully aware of such conveniences. Difficult tasks that would occupy an entire day of work in the mountains could be performed easily here. For him, having been brought up in the mountains without electricity or running water, city life was by definition magic. He only wished it would not be such back-breaking work to adapt to said conveniences.
でも道具を使わずに火を起こせるのは神様の仕事だと思うけど。
そのために積み重ねた手間は火炎放射器を手に入れるより面倒だとしても。
Sojiro wasn't sure how to answer Aoko. It would have been easy for him to ask Aoko how much accumulated effort she thought it had taken humans to imitate those gods, but he knew it would come across as an insult.
さっきのを見る限り、魔術ってのは何でもできると思ったけど、それは誤解なのか。
He glanced at the glass bottle on the table. Mentally, he sighed in relief. He still had not come to terms with the fact that he had been trapped inside that tiny thing. However...
それこそ誤解よ。万能じゃなければ、誰が魔術なんて学ぶと思ってるの？
Aoko puffed out her chest as she chided him.
手間暇かかるけど、魔術にできないことはないわ。中には、できていないけどできているように見せる、みたいな、何らかのイカサマはあるけどね。この世界に生まれた以上、その許容範囲でできないことなんてないの。そこで魔法が出てくるんだけど、それはまた改めて。私が言いたかったのは、魔術は奇跡を起こしているのではなくて、その過程が奇跡だってこと。結果が奇跡になるのは魔法の方なの。偉大な魔術師っていうのは、個人の魔術だけで旅客機飛ばしたりする人のこと。対して偉大な魔法使いっていうのは、今不可能なことを可能にする人のことよ。
Okay, so a mage is someone that can use magical energy to make something that's within reason in the universe, or like if it's possible to do under the laws of physics and by the laws of the universe, a mage can use it in an anomalous way, or can make it happen in an anomalous way. But the actual phenomenon is within reason. A magician is what one would traditionally consider to be using magic.
そういった意味じゃ、私たちは最後の魔法使いになるかもしれないけどね。
脱線し
Alice had been quietly listening until she muttered her rebuke, as if Aoko had crossed the line.
そこまで教える必要はないでしょう。しずきくんに教えるべきこと。
悪かったわ。ちょい口滑らせた。ともかく、魔術師っていうのは、暇さえあれば魔術の実験をしてる連中で、自分の家系が伝えてきた秘技を守るためなら、鬼でも悪魔にでもなる。必然、そのアジト。工房って言うんだけど、工房も魔術的な機構が積み重なって、要塞みたいになっちゃうの。
It's wizard time! Fireball!
秘技を守るために、入ってきた相手を問答無用で叩きのめす仕掛けとか。
I just remember the dumb little video that I've seen a friend post.
この洋館もそういった工房と同じなの。武勇人に歩き回ってさっきみたいなことになったら私でも助けてあげられないから暗闇には気をつけなさい。気がついたら鏡の中にいるとか本気であるから。
Well, at the very least she's giving him at the very least she's warning him. Sojiro so hoped they would provide him with a general idea of what to watch out for, but he passed knowing that he was unlikely to get a straight answer.
枝葉から入っちゃったけど、要は私たちのプライベートに関わるなってこと。いくら最後には記憶を消すって言っても、それを見られた段階で消すしかないものもあるから。
なるほど。この中にもルールがある。
His eyes wandered as he trailed off mid-sentence, pondering. He understood that the mansion was more dangerous than outside, and that magecraft needed to stay secret. But the explanation seemed to contradict his current problem. For starters, how had he managed to witness something that they took such pains to keep secret?
すまない。話の腰を折るんだけど、いいかな。魔術師は教会という組織で結ばれてるんだろ？なら、どうして青崎はあんな人形に襲われたんだ？あれの持ち主が魔術師なら、君たちは味方。
それは最後にしようと思ってたのよ。普通はここまでの話だけで眉唾者っていうか笑い飛ばすっていうか。
Listen, I'm gonna be real. If I was in Sotro's place, I'd be far past the point of actually questioning the realism of any of this.
いくら経験済みだからって魔術なんてもんをあっさり受け入れるの。
Aoko scratched her head as though troubled by how Sojiro could take every word at face value. Across from her, Alice's face betrayed no expression, but she shared the same opinion. Is that so?
おかしいわよ。そもそもあんたは第一ステップから変だった。普通は驚いたり怖がったり無視したりするものなのに、どうして魔法使いだなんて言った私を信じたの？
In retrospect, this question should have been posed at the House of Mirrors. Back then, though Sojiro was surprised by seeing the phenomenon of magecraft for the first time, he showed no surprise or discomfort toward Aoko, the mage wielding it. Honestly, yeah, that actually would have been a better place to ask the question, because at this point he's seen enough to where any normal person would probably stop questioning it. Feeling the probing stares of the two mages, made Sojiro feel uneasy. From where he was standing, their suspicion was suspicious in and of itself.
なんでも何もない。青崎、山ではね、あるものはあるのが当たり前なんだよ。理由をつけられるだけの知識がなかったからにしても、実際に見たものを信じないなんてことはないんだ。それに君も言ったろ。あなたにとっては魔法もライターも同じものなんだろうって。
Fair enough, I guess. Though they weren't really the same to him anymore, he added quietly before shutting up. With what he said about those innocent days in the mountains had come from the heart, and the words resonated with not only Aoko Ozaki, but also Alice Kuonji. It was something everyone should have. Principles to stand by. Indeed, to this boy, those words were an unshakable truth.
あるものはあるか。
She was impressed, if only slightly. If this boy, no matter how much of an outlier was, could accept the things around him, he'd be able to get through this just fine.
そうね。宗十郎はそうなのよね。簡単に信じてもらえることが信じられない。
Much like when Aoko met Sojiro for the first time. In that classroom on his first day, Sojiro took everything that was happening in his stride. The memory brought a bitter smile to Aoko's face.
じゃ、気を取り直してっと。
Alright.
宗十郎の疑問だけどね。魔術師もいろいろあって、こういった連中は教会の目を盗んでやりたい放題で、利益目的で他の魔術師に喧嘩を売ってくる。そんな連中にとって、私たちは都合のいい格好のカモなのよ。私たちは教会と協定関係にあるだけで、門下ってわけじゃないから。私たちが殺されたところで、教会は助けてくれないしね。
でも魔術師が
それが公にならないのなら教会は目をつむるわ。むしろバレなければ魔術師同士の争いを奨励してるぐらいよ。ま、私たちが襲われてるのはそれとは別の話で、単に土地を持ってるからなんだけど。
土地ってこの家？
まさかこの三崎市一帯の管理地の権利を持ってるのよ、私とアリスは。
管理地ってつまり
I think they just mean in terms of all the magic and magecraft related stuff in the area, not the actual like property rights. Dazzled, Sojiro looked away. He was sure he could see a halo of light around Aoko. He'd only been renting an apartment for 2 weeks, but he was already aware of how magnificent the prospect of owning land in the city might be.
Oh.
The word Sojiro was trying to articulate was rich. He shook all over with an emotion he did not fully grasp.
悪いけど、そういうんじゃないから。私たちで土地って言ったら、 魔術師として
Okay,
の
that's kind
霊
of
地
what I
の
was
所有権
saying.
支配権のこ
Just
とを言うの。
magic related stuff, not the actual property.
うちはマイナーだけど、古くからこの辺りに根を下ろしてた魔術師で、三崎町もうちの管理下ってわけ。
Hold on a moment. Okay.
管理地っていうのはね、霊的な力が歪んで集まりやすい土地のこと。そういう土地は昔から貴重で、魔術の実践、実験には不可欠でもある。成功への絶対条件は、優れた霊地、堅固な工房、多くの弟子たちってね。魔術師たちにとって、土地付き館付きの住み家を持つのは、一つの野望なんだから。
Sojiro let her continue while wondering exactly who these two girls were to have achieved both ambitions already.
でも、その管理地は大部分が教会に仕切られてて、もう余っている土地はないの。はぐれ魔術師や土地のない魔術師は、教会に毎月寄付金を納めて土地を借りるしかない。ま、手よく教会のお偉いさんたちに尽くす働き蜂ってところね。
The Mage Association landlords.
でも、ここの土地は何百年も前から青崎のものだから、教会とは関係がないの。
I'm willing to bet that the mage that is trying to kill Aoko is at least tangentially related. Is it in some way being paid off by the association just so they could get their hands on the land?
ここまで言えばわかるでしょ。そういったフリーの連中からすれば。
Sojiro nodded to himself, unsure whether to call the conversation mundane or outright disturbing.
よくわかった。
そういうこと。ただ、岬の管理地はマイナーのさらにマイナーだから、やってくる挑戦者も三流ばっかりよ。今回の敵だって、どっかの三流魔術師が、ここなら楽に奪えると思ってやってきたんだろうし。
管理地の話はそれで十分よ、青子。しずきくんも、他に魔術危険があるとすれば、私たちの戦いに彼が巻き込まれる可能性だ。
それは大丈夫でしょう。だってこいつ、魔力のかけらもないじゃない。魔力感知には引っかからないし、番犬以下のに、私たちはただ、忘却のルーンを見つけるまで。
Alice silently stared her partner down. Their ideas of involving Sojiro differed greatly in both gravity and risk. Aoko's lack of experience had led her to believe that Sojiro would not get directly involved in any fighting. It was an honest and rational thought. Aoko despised wasted action, so it was natural for her to expect the same frugality from her enemies. However, there were those in this world who could not tell right from wrong until it was too late. Yeah, I will give Aoko credit here. She is good to her word, and she is good to her word and is actively trying to find a way around the association law. Plus, it was not as though there was a large amount of talk of her being uncomfortable with the idea of attacking Sojiro in the first place, even if she might have voiced differently during the actual confrontation. Also, yeah, be safe out there, because there are some bad people out, and like, you shouldn't be paranoid, but like, don't be paranoid, because most people are perfectly fine. Most people, in my experience, are perfectly fine, but there are some people who are. There are some people who. There are people in the world that are. That are out there to hurt people. So you don't be paranoid, but always just remember that things might not be as they seem with a person.
先のことは誰にもわからないから。その時になって後悔がなければいいけれど。
With a gloomy sigh, Alice came to her feet.
ちょっと、何のために長話したと思ってるのよ。一番重要なあんたの意見、聞いてないんですけど。
あなたがあなたの方針を守るというのなら、それでいいわ。私も好きにするだけよ。
Alice glided soundlessly to the door. As the girl in black opened it, she paused, barely lit by the dim corridor. Then, without warning, to the rhythm of her footsteps, the small glass bottle floated into the air and shattered without mercy.
あの時、こうしておけばよかった。
Her sharp tone made Sojiro's face go pale. Alice's voice was so quiet it was hard to tell if she was being serious or mocking him.
私も言い忘れていたけど。
She icily eyed them before turning away, and in a voice even colder than her gaze, stated,
まだ認めていないから。
Her frigid departure seemed to forebode the many difficulties that lay ahead.
たく、往生際が悪い。
Aoko leaned back on the sofa while hurling abusive epithets. Her face looked even more irritated
見
than
逃すの
usual.
とここに住まわせるのは別問題よって。じゃあそれ以外にどんな方法があるってのよ。譲る気もなさそうだし、この分じゃ実力行使に出るかもね、あの子。
Sojiro threw a wary glance at Aoko while she grumbled. He wondered what Alice's show of defiance meant, shattering the glass bottle like she did.
宗十郎には記憶をなくしてもらうってことで話はつけたけど、心の底アリスにしちゃ珍しく他人を意識してたけど、やっぱりここに住まわせるとなると難しいみたい。寝てる分には良かったけど、起きてるあんたを見たらこうえも言わぬ刺激心を刺激されたとかさ。気をつけてね、宗十郎。あの子あんたを殺しに来るかもしれないから。
If anything, Aoko's warning was an indication that persuading Alice had hit a dead end.
なんか状況はあの夜からあまり変わってないようだね、青崎。
She shot him an unconcerned look in reply.
そうじゃないぞ。青崎の次はあの子がやる気満々じゃないか。さっきみたいな目にあったら逃げることもできない。こういうの生殺しって言うんじゃないか。
そうならないように努力するのね。ま、アリスの理由は遊園地の時ほど切迫したものじゃないから、そのうち諦めてくれるとは思うんだけど。
青崎の時とは違うアリスの理由？
ええ。遊園地の時は秘密厳守のためだったけど、それは一応解決してる。あんたが底抜けなんで、秘密厳守云々であそこまで反対する理由はないの。あの子は単にね、ここに住んでほしく
So
ないだ
Alice
け
is
なの
just
よ。
being petty. She said so matter-of-factly, her eyes cold and serious. Sojiro had hoped for a trace of deceit or exaggeration, but
確
alas.
かにあの子はそんな素振りだったけど、変だね。それならもっと他の手段を取ればいいのに。
Perhaps feeling guilty about putting Alice out, Sojiro looked uncharacteristically concerned. Aoko immediately knew what his words really meant.
例えば、記憶を消す。
The apathy in her voice until now was gone. Sojiro answered with a simple nod. In truth, it was undoubtedly the easiest solution for all parties concerned.
宗十郎
However,
私、約束は破らないの。
she hated taking the easy way out. and that quiet fury was clear in her soft words. As for where that fury was directed, Sojiro was acutely aware. The pain in his chest regret making her say those words.
すまない。考えが足りなかった。
His sudden apology caused her usual sullen expression to return. Aoko had not appreciated how angry she was, let alone the reason for it. To her, his apology had come out of nowhere.
あんたって本当わかんないわね。
She stared at Sojiro, unblinking.
あれ、そうだな。自分でもよくわからない。
Even in saying he was not sure, Sojiro had answered honestly. Aoko was at a loss for words.
ただ、青崎の言いたいことは分かった。約束を守るっていうことは、
He shot her a brazenly honest smile. That smiling face, filled with blissful ignorance, almost made her smile back instinctively.
当たり前じゃない。落ちなきゃ合ってればいいなんて恥ずかしくてできないでしょ。
Tsundere. Tsundere. Give me a T. Give me an S. Give me a U-N-D-E-R-E. What's that spelled? Tsundere. I'm not even implying this in like she is romantically interested in him, just the fact that she can't actually formulate her own feelings. Aoko attempted to cover for her embarrassment with a quick retort. Though unintentional, having her true feelings exposed like that made Aoko a little uncomfortable. Finding offense in something was second nature to Aoko. Being made to feel uncomfortable was not. Though far from being unhappy at the remark, she turned away from its speaker. To disguise her perceived shame, Aoko started up the conversation again.
あなたを見逃すって言うなら、気持ちの問題じゃなくて、ちゃんと状況もそうなるようにするのは当たり前なの。宗十郎をここに住まわせることが、あの約束を守ることになるんなら、厄介なアリスだって言い伏せるわよ。脅かすだけならまだしも、ずっと瓶付けなんてさせられるわけないでしょ。
そっか。青崎があの子を説得しない素振りなのは、もうできるだけの説得をした後だからなのか。あ、それで彼女とは冷戦中なんだ。
別にあんたのためじゃないわ。私は私のために約束を守ってるだけだし。お察しの通り、私のやるべきことはもう終わってるし、あとはそっちが努力する番だから勝手にすれば。
Huh? He replied, tilting his head.
あのね、いい？同居案を何とか認めさせることができるのは私だけだから、2日間ぶっ通しでアリスを言い伏せもした。けどそれ以上は無理。私、ここから先はノータッチだから。しばらくはアリスから守ってあげるけど、その間にあの子にあんたを認めさせることはあんたにしかできないんだからね、宗十郎。
なんと
I mean, to be fair, in all fairness, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink it. Yeah, in all fairness, Aoko does appear to have done as much as she possibly could. Sojiro had not expected that at all. Alice Kuonji, the girl in black who kept everyone at arm's length. If Aoko was a modern-day mage in hiding, then Alice was a bona fide witch from the Middle Ages.
青崎、君自分がどれだけ難しいことを言ってるか分かってるか？
そうね。私もこの件に関してだけは同情するわ。
Aoko stood up from the sofa. This was the end of the discussion, at least for now.
私たちがどんな人間かはおおよそ分かったでしょ。魔術に関してはこれ以上立ち入らない方があんたのためだから、説明はここまでね。で、肝心の今後の方針だけど、3ヶ月間ここで暮らす。当初の目標というより最初の試練は なんとかアリスに同居人として認めてもらうこと。
試練って言った。今そういう類のことを言った。
I mean that. I mean, I believe I believe a more accurate term would probably be a Herculean effort, or a Herculean labor.
ごまかしてもいいことないでしょ、この手のことは。うまくいかなきゃ粉々なわけだし。
With her cold-blooded remark, Aoko started walking toward the door.
あ、そうそう。宗十郎の部屋だけど、3階に用意しといたから。2階のホールの裏側に階段があるから使って。ここは寮ってわけでもないし、時間は自由に使いなさい。ただし、西館にだけは入らないようにね。東館は私が借りてるから比較的安全だけど、それでも歩き回らない方が無難だわ。ま、基本安全なのはあんたの部屋とここだけよ。
Okay, I think I'm starting to get more of a grasp on Aoko. She basically can't actually. She is mean, and she is mean, but on the other hand, she is very reliable. Like if she says she's gonna do something, if she tells you that she's gonna do something, she's gonna do it and fulfill it to the best of her abilities. And that she is definitely a lot, despite her comment. Sorry, I need to clear my throat. Should probably drink some water before I continue talking. Got another bottle right here. But yeah, basically she puts up one heck of a front. She's at the very least capable of some. She's at least got some humanity. Alice seems completely disconnected from it and is purely mage mode all the time.
青崎はいろいろおかしい。魔術なんかよりもっと大事な説明があると思う。
He desperately called out to her as she began to leave the drawing room. Aoko could not help but pity
せめてほら、案内とか。
面倒なんでパス。おのぼりさんを案内。起きたばっかりだし、とりあえず今日は部屋で休んだら。朝になったらもっとも、私もそう暇じゃなし。そばについてあげられるのは、期末1週間以内にアリスと仲良くなるなり、弱みを握るなりしないと。まあ、あれよね。
Okay, she's definitely a lot mean. I really don't know what to think about Aoko as a person. Like, I really don't know what to think about, how to think about her. I still like her as a character, but I don't. It's hard to get a read on her. With barely a wave of goodbye, the student council tyrant walked out. He unconsciously clenched the hand he had raised. Left all alone, he was at a complete loss. Then, as if to encourage him, burp, chirp, chirp, chirp. With the sound of lightly fluttering wings, a blue robin appeared out of nowhere. A robin. I shall name it Dick Grayson. I promise. I swear, I can be funny. The tiny, chubby bird instantly looked Sotaro up and down. The blue robin, a bird said to bring happiness according to folklore, flapped its low wings as if to cheer him on. Then, with a flutter, it mercilessly flicked off the lights. Alice's pettiness is becoming more and more apparent. Leaving Sojiro alone in the drawing room, Aoko returned to her bedroom. She closed the door to her room, and as soon as she sat on her bed, she was overcome by an unexpected wave of exhaustion. Sojiro had no way of knowing, but she had been preparing for war. In the event that Alice impulsively pulled out a ploy, Aoko had to be ready to react in an instant. She sighed heavily, but not from the fatigue she felt at fighting with Alice. She frowned a dejected frown, and we get some introspection. What weighed on Aoko's mind was not Alice.
でも甘くするのはあいつのためにならないし、基本おとなしくしてもらった方がいいわけだし。
Okay, some introspection. It would be trouble if he wandered around like he owned the place after all. The safest thing for him would be if he holed up in his room, too scared out of his wits to leave it.
青崎は味方だなんてか、アリス同様、人でなし扱いされた方が楽だわ。
She nodded to herself, agreeing with her take on the situation. For the most part, it was a sound plan. If there was a problem, it would be this.
すまない青崎。一つ聞きたいことがあるんだが。
Okay, so she actually had a reason for that. It would be a lot safer for him if he just, was too scared to wander around and poke his head into things. Which, I mean, I do feel like she was too hard on him, but I can at least get why she did that. Like, if you're too scared to go around if you're too scared to go someplace, you're probably just gonna stick in the spots are good. Like, I get her reasoning, but I still think she was too harsh on him. Not 10 minutes had passed since leaving him in the drawing room. For Sojiro to shirk off what she had said to visit her room so fast, it was like he had no sense of danger at all.
実は外に出たいんだ。
Of course he would ask to leave the house. Aoko lacked the energy for sarcastic barb.
洋館の中は歩き回らないし、用を済ませたらきちんと戻ってくる。ただ。
でも、アルバイトには行くのよね。
How did you know? Sojiro exclaimed in surprise. But it was Aoko who decided to display shock at him.
まあいいわ。基本、午後10時まで。その時間には必ず屋敷にいること。その後は夜勤に出かけるなり、庭でバーベキューするなり、何でも好きにしていい。それと、玄関に鍵はかかってないから。
気のせいじゃなければだけど、青崎。
あんた相手に気を使った自分に呆れ果ててるだけよ。外に出るのはいいけど、その前にこの錠剤飲んで。
ん
Sojiro took the purple pill from her outstretched hand and dubiously put it in his mouth. He told himself that it must have been some kind of medicine.
それじゃあ行ってくる。
あっそ。今度は窓から出ていかないでよね。
Sojiro laughed himself all the way to the foyer, unsure of what exactly he had found funny. Aoko watched him go, both indifferent and amazed all at
予定
once.
が半日早まっただけか。あの薬を飲ませるの、明日の朝にしてあげようと思ったのに。
Wait, what was the pill for? She huffed, ruffling her hair in exasperation and returning to her room. Discerning what made Sojiro tick was a waste of brain matter. In all likeliness, it was more concerned about missing 2 days of work than his own well-being after being bedridden for 2 days. With the day's work behind him, Sojiro returned to the mansion.
よし。どこを探しても2階のホールから上がれる階。
It was just before midnight. This was the scene that awaited him beyond the rickety staircase. Not much surprised Sojiro, or rather being surprised had become normal to him. This scene, however, was enough to leave him speechless. The room allotted to Sojiro, no matter how he looked at it, no matter how he read it through in his mind, was, without a shadow of a doubt, an attic. This treatment stirred a tinge of anxiety in him, just as he was about to flop onto the taut sheets of his bed, wondering if he could make this work despite a share of other problems. He knows an awkward courtesy so meager as to be
寒
useless.
かったら重ねて使うこと。これはサービスとする。
The message in the memo pointed to the meticulous personality of the author. The bed had been perfectly prepared. Carefully setting aside the blanket that had been painstakingly placed on the edge of the bed for him in case he needed it, he looked up at the sky. Though faint, the stars twinkled through the skylight. For a mountain boy, that meager light was more than enough for him. The stark contrast with the drawing room had caught him off guard, but now that he had collected himself, it was not so bad. This room fit his personality. Even if he still was not used to the building, he felt more at ease here than he did in any building in the city. Perhaps because it was built on a hill, surrounded by woods. The atmosphere here was a little closer to the mountains where he used to live.
でも、家の中に霧が出るのはどうなんだろう。
He crooked his neck, pondering over the spectacle he had witnessed. On the way to his room, Sojo had encountered what looked like a fog in the foyer on the second floor. The misty fog drifted in a portion of the corridor, reminding him of a swarm of mosquitoes. As he stared at it, he swore he could make out a strange landscape as he moved closer to get a better look. Again, out of nowhere, here inside the mansion, a little blue bird darted purposefully in front of him.
鳥?
The bird caught his attention, stopping him in his tracks. When he looked to check on the fog again, the strange scene had disappeared.
この家、隙間でもあるのかな?
Or it was Alice doing you a courtesy, or it was the bird doing you a courtesy and stopping you from wandering into something Alice would kill you for. He muttered to himself as he sat on the bed. Meager as it was, the starlight peeping in through the skylight calmed him. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, this will work. Exhaling slowly, he lay down. For the time being, he had the essentials needed to live, and his bed was many times softer than it appeared. Thinking his worries seemed smaller than they were, he quickly drifted off to sleep. That was the story of from when he opened his eyes to when he fell asleep. Just like that, the short night following the long night was over. For one thing was true. Sojiro was an optimist to a fault, but it wasn't the end of the world. Now, let us rewind 5 hours prior to this glutton for punishment going to bed. It was 7 o'clock in the evening, just after the unproductive discussion between the two mages and the boy had ended. Leaving her roommate and the intruder in the drawing room, the girl walked alone through the foyer. From there, she headed to the west wing. These were Alice Kuonji's personal chambers, in which even her roommate Aoko Ozaki seldom dared to step foot. The foyer was illuminated only by pale moonlight. Hard footsteps echoed through the dreary, moonlit lobby. In such mansions in Japan, there was no custom for removing shoes at the door. Hence, Alice crossed the foyer in her boots. She only removed them when she relaxed in her bedroom. Suddenly, she remembered something from her childhood. She used to enjoy the feeling of the cold hardwood floor under bare feet and would walk around the foyer on particularly sunny days. After her father affectionately scolded her for it, she never did it again.
そうだったわね。青子は結局守らなかった。
She let out a quiet sigh. Alice's new roommate, whom she took on after coming to Japan, would not comply with her instructions.
落ち着かないものはしょうがない。
Aoko would say, changing into her slippers. Aoko might have found it natural to do so, given that she lived in a typical Japanese house through middle school, but every time Alice heard her flip-flopping through the foyer, she wanted to cancel their cohabitation. By now, Alice was not particularly bothered by it anymore. Human adaptability was remarkable at times and ungracious at others. The emotional attachments of the past had proved far too brittle under the weight of reality. The little blue bird was perched on the banister. Its tiny chirping made Alice stop and look its way.
今夜は放っておくわ。今は青子の問題よ。
The lack of feeling in her voice made the bird tilt its head as it sang. Tweet, tweet, tweet. It trilled as though questioning its master's uncharacteristic leniency.
約束は約束よ。今夜ぐらいは多めに見ないと。青子と彼はそれだけの活躍をしたのだし。
She said to the bird, her voice betraying her discontent. If you win, I'll let you go. She would keep that promise in spite of the unquenchable desire to fight that burned in her chest.
でも、その後の処遇は別の話。条件付きのゲームに勝ったぐらいで、いつまでも得意げでいられるのは心外だわ。
Perhaps it was perfectionism born of the fastidiousness, but despite her prim demeanor, Alice Kuonji was a sore loser. It did not matter to her whose magecraft was superior. Losing the game had proven hard to move on from. The little bird fluttered its wings in agreement. Drinking in Alice's contempt, it was itching to dive-bomb the invader. It looked like a soldier saluting a superior officer as it preened itself. The blue bird turned to face its master. Tweet, tweet, tweet. Tweet, tweet, tweet. Its light-hearted tweeting seemed to display a desire to deal with Sojiro first thing in the morning.
そうね。理由さえできたのなら。
Except her words lacked any bite. On the face of it, they were the chilling kind one might come to expect from a witch's lips, but then again so tame as to remind you of a certain robin's flapping.
しばらくの話よ。けど、それも一時だけ。私の我慢も長くは続く。だいたい、青子も人にかまけていられる立場じゃないわ。いつかもすれば。
When that time came, expelling him would be simple. Alice was aware her roommate was a pragmatist with no vision. The situation she'd created would not allow her to wait around. She could only afford to protect that boy for 3 or 4 days or at most. Beyond that, Alice sensed Aoko would crack and say something like, "You take care of this, Alice."
それまで待つか。あるいはどちらにしても結果は変わらないわ。
Alice Kuonji would suffer no more irritations, and protecting a witness, let alone allowing them to live in her mansion, was an indignity. Alice looked up, fascinated by the dense fog that had crawled into the foyer. Above the fireplace was a single mirror. Roughly 3 feet in diameter, it decorated the wall where one might find a painting. Its surface was faintly clouded and vaguely reflected the foyer's appearance.
スナークをなくした影響でしょうね。鏡の機能、しばらくは制御できないみたい。
The little bird joyfully chirped at its master's mumbling. The bird attempted to imply that there was no need for her to lift a finger, not if the nuisance would fall into the mirror of his own accord. Or perhaps, had the little bird not sang, Alice would have come to the same conclusion. For some reason, she recalled an earlier conversation.
これでも一番無難だと思う。
In response to her question, the boy inside the bottle shrugged his shoulders and answered. From his perspective, the city and the mansion were no different. It seemed that having just moved from the countryside, everything was something he'd never seen before.
自慢できることじゃないが、まだ書き物さえ満足にできないし、都会のルールは複雑すぎて、何が正しいのかさえ区別がつかない。
More than embarrassment, his voice was full of resentment. He was angry about something, though Alice could not tell what. But
だから、どこにいても危ないことに変わりはないんだ。
Sorry, just closing the door.
極端な話、道を歩くだけでも、人と話すだけでも不安になる。俺は、どこでだろうとうまくやっていける保証はないんだよ。けど、ここにはそんな奴に気を使ってくれる人がいる。 気遣ってくれる理由は物騒なものっぽいけど。
Her eyes welled up ever so slightly. Those soft words were something she could not brush off, because they made sense to her. Given that everything in the city was a danger to him, nothing had changed after coming to the mansion. In reality, he had no reason to fear this place in particular. If anything was different from the outside, it would be that someone here was his ally. With that in view, he had been entirely sincere. His explanation hadn't contained any flattery towards Alice Kuonji, nor pandering to Aoko Alzaki. He was simply speaking from the heart. I like it here.
今、鏡に迷い込まれるのは迷惑ね。鏡の機能は侵入者の探索に専念させたいし、彼が迷い込みそうになったら止めてあげて。
Oh, Alice has a little bit of mercy. The bird shook its feathers at her strange instruction. Alice looked away from the mirror and continued her walk. The bird chirped in
あなた
protest.
の仕事よ、ロビー。それぐらいの役には立って。
Leaving the bird with that icy retort, she vanished into the west wing. All that remained was the moonlight, and the little blue bird, trembling at a perilous prospect of unprecedented change. Bird violently shakes. And that is chapter 6 done. Yeah, I don't know if I'll have enough time to do more than that, especially with how long these chapters are. At some point, I'm probably going to have enough time to do just one massive stream where I could bust out 2 or 3 of these longer chapters at once. But that ain't gonna be for a while. But yeah, so yeah, again, sorry for the late stream. Like I mentioned, I had some trouble with my PC. Probably gonna have to get a new power supply unit. I am just, if anything on this computer needs to be replaced, I'm glad that it's the PSU, because that's like, hang on, I can just look that up real quick. All right, I might as well switch over to, yeah, might as well, yeah, might as well switch over to this, since we're in and off for the night. Okay, yeah, I can just run by. Okay, yeah, I can just run by my local Best Buy. Yeah, I can just run by. I can just run by a Best Buy, get one for like under 60, like one that had like a 700-watt one for like a little less than $60. And the funny thing is, this is actually like, it still has more juice in it. It still has more juice in it than my than this current one. But man, I would have, man. Well. I need to figure out what's wrong with this thing anyway. And given that it can't be the heat anymore, because sure, it's running hotter than it really has a right to, but it's still within, or like my CPU is still within like perfectly fine, like within like good, basically it's not it might run hotter than I'd like, but it's not running dangerously hot. It's within acceptable an acceptable heat range. But the stupid, so it's got to be something to do with the PSU. Like, I tested it out with a meter like a couple months ago, and it seemed fine, but maybe it was something that testing it like that didn't. Maybe I would have needed to open it up to see. Well, that's a problem for tomorrow, Simon. Tomorrow's problem for tomorrow, Simon. Oh, man. But yeah, my computer shut down like right as I was about to stream, or I'll start the stream on time, or at least around on time. Oh well. Oh well. Yeah. Oh well. I'll learn. I'll figure it out eventually. But yeah, that was chapter 6 of Witch on the Holy Night. Thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate the support. And I'll see you next time. Take care.